Good evening. I'm Sarah Halterman, Programs Associate of the Aspen Writers Foundation. And on behalf of the staff and the board of the AWF, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 14th Annual Winter Words series of author readings and talks. This evening's event is sponsored by Aspen Peak Magazine, the City of Aspen, the Aspen Times, Le Dôme de Aspen, Aspen Skiing Company, Morris and Fearwald Real Estate, Aspen Public Radio, and the North of Nell Condominium Hotel. Tonight we celebrate a very special and new relationship with Culture Ireland and their Imagine Ireland initiative. Our love of Irish literature is nothing new, but our organization's fascination with contemporary Irish authors was cemented in June 2005 when we highlighted the country during our Summer Words Literary Festival. Since then, we have brought many great Irish authors, including our 2011 writer-in-residence, Colin McCann, and the distinguished poet, Paul Muldoon, who joined us actually just a few weeks ago for Winter Words. Lucky us, tonight we present another incredible Irish storyteller who has amassed a body of work that is as diverse as she is creative. Emma Donoghue's impressive range goes far beyond form and genre. She has written historical novels, articles, essays, short stories, fairy tales, and plays, and has edited anthologies of fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. But as prolific and successful as Emma has been, how could anyone have expected what hit us in September of 2010? I'm sure most of you have read Room, but if you haven't, you're in for something very special. It's unlike anything that has ever been written before. Emma has given us reason to celebrate the power of the human spirit, the power of the written word, and the power of stories. She is one of a kind, and we are so pleased that she and her family could join us in Aspen. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Emma Donoghue.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, everyone who has brought me here. I've never had such a long list of sponsors in my life. The pressure not to let down a single one. They've given me 2 bottles of water up here. You'll have to excuse my hacking cough. I've been on a paperback tour of the dampest bits of England. Publishers every now and then realise that they are far too focused on their big cities where they're based. So my British publishers send me to places that I'd never heard of, like Tonbridge and Doncaster. So it's far more exciting being in Aspen. I'm going to read for just about 8 minutes. Can everyone hear me back there? Yeah? Because I want to leave a time for lots and lots of Q&A afterwards. I'm finding with this book that readers who come to these events, and in particular book club members, have more to say about the book than I do. So it would seem churlish to in any way limit that Q&A time to a little bit at the end. I'm going to read a little bit from the second chapter of Room, when Ma has started revealing to Jack that there is a real place called outside the walls. On Sunday, we're having bagels for dinner, very chewy, with jelly and peanut butter as well. Ma takes her bagel out of her mouth and there's a pointy thing stuck in it. At last, she says. I pick up the pointy thing. It's all yellowy with dark brown bits. Bad tooth, I say. Ma nods. She's feeling in the back of her mouth. That's so weird. We could stick 'em back in, I say. We could stick 'em back in with flour glue, maybe. Ma shakes her head, grinning. I'm glad it's out, Jack. Now it can't hurt anymore. It's so weird, though, that he was part of her a minute ago, but now he's not. Just a thing. Hey, you know what, Ma? If you put him under your pillow, a fairy will come in the night invisibly and turn him into money. Not in here, sorry, says Ma. Why not? Well, Jack, the tooth fairy doesn't know about room. Her eyes are looking through the walls. Outside has everything, I think. Whenever I think of a thing now like skis or fireworks or islands or elevators or yo-yos, I have to remember that they're real. They're actually happening right now and outside all together. It makes my head tired. And people too. Firefighters, teachers, burglars, babies, saints, soccer players and all sorts. They're all really in outside. I'm not there though. Me and Ma, we're the only ones not there. Are we still real? After dinner, Ma tells me Hansel and Gretel and how the Berlin Wall fell down and Rumpelstiltskin. I like when the Queen has to guess the little man's name or else he'll take her baby away. Are stories true? I ask. Which ones? Says Ma. The Mermaid Mom and Hansel and Gretel and all them? Well, says Ma, not literally. What's literally? Well, they're magic, Jack. She says they're not about real people walking around today. So they're fake, I say. No, she says. Stories are a different kind of true. My face is all scrunched up from trying to understand. Is the Berlin Wall true? Well, there was a wall, says Ma, but it's not there anymore. I'm so tired I'm going to rip in two like Rumpelstiltskin did at the end. Night, night, says Ma, shutting the doors of wardrobe on me. Sleep tight, don't let the bugs bite. I didn't think I was switched off, but then old Nick's here all loud, so I must have been switched off. But vitamins, Ma is saying. Highway robbery, he says. You want us getting sick? She asks. It's a giant rip-off, says old Nick. I saw this expose one time. They all end up in the toilet. Who ends up in toilet, I'm wondering. It's just, says Ma, it's just that if we had a better diet... Oh, here we go, he says. Whine, whine, whine. I can see him through the slats of wardrobe. Old Nick, he's sitting on the edge of bath. And Ma's voice gets mad. She says, I bet we're cheaper to keep than a dog. We don't even need shoes. You have no idea about the world of today, says old Nick. I mean, where do you think the money is going to keep coming from? Nobody of them says anything. And then Ma says, what do you mean? Money in general or... And old Nick says 6 months. His arms are folded. I can see them through the slats. They're huge. 6 months I've been laid off. And have you had to worry your pretty little head? I can see Ma, too, through the slats. She's nearly beside him. She says, what happened? Like it matters, says old Nick. Are you looking for another job? Are you in debt? How are you going to... Shut your mouth, he says. And I don't mean to, but I'm so scared when he says that. I'm so scared he's going to hurt her again that the sound just bursts out of my head. I go, Old Nick is looking right at me in wardrobe. He takes a step and another, and he knocks on the slats. I see his hand shadow, and he says, hey, in there. He's talking to me. My chest is going clang, clang, and I hug my knees and press my teeth together. I want to get under blanket, but I can't move. I can't do anything. He's asleep. That's Ma talking. She says I'm asleep, but I'm not. She keep you in the closet all day as well as all night? The you, he says, is me. I wait for Ma to say no. She doesn't keep me in the closet all day, but she doesn't say anything. Doesn't seem natural, says old Nick. I can see into his eyes. They're all pale. Can he see me in wardrobe? Am I turning to stone? What if he opens wardrobe? I think I might... I figure there must be something wrong, old Nick is saying to Ma. You've never let me get a good look since the day he was born. Poor little freak's got 2 heads or something. Why he said that? I nearly want to put my one head out of wardrobe just to show him I've only got one. Ma is right there in front of the slats. I can see the knobs of her shoulder blades through her T-shirt. She says, Jack's just shy. He's got no reason to be shy of me, says old Nick. Never laid a hand on him. Why would he lay his hand on me? I bought him that fancy remote-controlled Jeep, didn't I? I know boys. I was one once. Come on, Jack. He said my name. Come on out and get your lollipop. A lollipop? He's brung me a lollipop? Let's just go to bed. That's Ma's voice. It's all strange. And old Nick does a kind of laugh. He says, I know what you need, missy. What Ma needs? Is it something on the grocery list? Come on, she says again. And old Nick says, "Didn't your mother ever teach you manners?" Lamp goes out and it's all dark. Matt doesn't have a mother. Why did he say that? Bed's loud. That's him getting in. I put blanket over my head and I press my ears so not to hear. I don't want to count the creaks tonight, but I do. I'll leave that there. Thank you. The audiobook version of Room, they asked my permission to make it a multi-voice one. And the effect is marvellous because for the first about 3 discs of it, you've got 2 relatively light voices, the woman who plays Ma and then the woman who plays Jack. Though it's amazing, my kids are convinced it's a little boy, but it's actually a woman. But then in about disc 3, suddenly the male actor comes in with the deep voice for old Nick. And, there's a kind of sonic shock, Who would like to ask the first question? Yes?
Can you talk about how you got yourself inside the head of a 5-year-old boy for that long? And what did you have to do when you were writing to get there from where you were?
Yeah, people think that writing in the head of a 5-year-old boy is the hardest possible thing, but I've done harder. I mean, I once had to write in the point of view of a male 18th century aristocrat, and for a Dublin girl of peasant stock, that was much more of a stretch. I mean, until that point, I'd managed to never learn the difference between an earl, a viscount, a duke, all those levels. But for that book, my novel Life Mask, I had to actually figure out the class system and then, take an interest in their strange activities like cockfighting and horse racing. So a 5-year-old boy who lives more in my era and in my world was much easier, especially as I had one in the house. And I know it seems like cheating. And I didn't write this book just because my son happened to be 4.5 when I got the idea. That was just a happy accident. But I have to say I paid my son more attention during the research and writing of Room than I have before or since. Like for a few brief months I was like, oh sure, let's play Lego. And he did sometimes wonder why I was writing down everything he said. But yes, I drew a lot on my son. Even though Jack in the book is, in a way, he's such a once-off. He's a strange boy because he's had such an odd upbringing. I deliberately didn't make him a child prodigy. I'm quite suspicious of the number of novels that feature child prodigy narrators. It's a bit handy for writers if your 5-year-old is able to be cute and quote Kierkegaard at the same time. So Jack is not the Kierkegaard quoting kind of boy at all. I tried to make him really very average, but then I knew that his upbringing would have shaped him in some strange ways. So I never just borrowed my son's language wholesale, but I did analyze his language I was trying to find the kind of universal patterns of 5-year-old grammar. Because from everything I've read about kids and language, you can add a lot of vocabulary if you expose them to it and explain what the words mean, but you really can't speed them up through the process of standardizing their grammar. And they have a wonderful kind of logic to it that they're going to carry on using words in a way that makes sense to them, and they hope adults will finally catch on, and then we don't. So eventually kids give in and speak like us. But a 5-year-old is still at that point where, he might know long and complicated words, but he will still say, I winned the race, So yes, I charted my son's language, and I paid attention a lot to how he played with things. For instance, one of the oddities of Jack's language in the book is that any object that there's just one of in Room, he gives a capital letter and a gender. And I did that because I never wanted Room to seem like a prison. I wanted to be absolutely true to my main character's perspective. So I never wanted it to seem small or impoverished or barren or empty or lonely. So I thought any child who has the natural instincts of a child, that is to socialize and to play, if he's only got his mother, he's going to make friends of every object he meets. So I decided that he would sort of people the room with not even imaginary characters, but just, he would take objects like a chair and a bed and treat them as characters and interact with them. Yes, some of those peculiar traits of Jack in the book, they actually grew out of my observing my son and other small kids and extrapolating from their behaviour. Many of these sort of life lessons Jack has to learn in this, they're things that regular kids figure out gradually from about the age of 1. The rules of what you're allowed to do in shops, the way you can pick something up but not actually rip it open. We've all had those moments in the dollar store where you're like, put it back. I tried to make the story of Jack and Ma as universal as possible, even though it's about the kind of incredibly statistically rare case that, there's really only a handful of them worldwide. But I tried to find within that strange story the universals. So yeah, I drew very much on my own son.
Okay. We did find ourselves wondering why you decided to have Ma almost leave. And I'm trying to be vague here for people who have not read the book.
Yeah, there's a moment. There's a moment where it looks like he will lose Ma.
And
that's right.
She spends the whole, first part of the book so fiercely protecting him and giving him as normal a life as possible. How did you come to that?
I'm going to answer that in a way that also answers a question people sometimes ask me. Basically, some people find the first half of the book so wonderfully enclosed and so gripping that they say, why didn't you just end it with the escape? But that, to me, would have made a much more simplistic and facile story in which escaping into modern America would be the answer to everyone's dreams. And also, Ma would have retained that slight sort of superhero, perfect, saintly mother thing. But I thought it would make for a much more interesting book, not only if we saw Ma and Jack in the outside world, but if the outside world actually revealed that Ma is not perfect at all, and that Jack, like any other kid, is in some ways stronger than his parent, in some ways wiser than his parent. So I wanted to make it, again, that universal within the freakish. I wanted to make it a sort of a coming-of-age story where Jack and Ma are parted for a while and where she is flawed. And I also thought that having her collapse in some way in the second half of the book, it made a lot of sense based on all the reading I'd done about things like solitary confinement. If you want to study the effects of solitary confinement, you don't need to look up strange, rare cases of freakish psychopaths. You just need to look at what governments do. So there's a lot of evidence about the mental stunting, the very, very long-term effects of solitary confinement. Often people hold it together quite well when they're in solitary, and then years later they develop weird social phobias. It's a cruel irony of solitary that you spend your time in solitary longing for company, and then on the outside you find yourself unable to bear company. So I wanted to never be shallow about Ma's suffering. I mean, she's hidden it from Jack as best she can, but I think it would leave her very damaged. And I think anyone who has a busy job, like being a teacher, will say that you only get sick at the holidays. So I wanted to have that very convincing dynamic where you hold it together, and Ma holds it together, and she's strong and strong and strong. And then at the very moment when other people are stepping in to take up some of the burden, that's the moment where she would fall apart. But it does come as a shock in the book because, of course, you only see what Jack sees, and Ma has managed not to show Jack how damaged she is. So I agree that readers are quite startled at that point, but I hope they sort of look back and realise that there were many hints of how damaged Ma was and how it's much harder to play several different roles. I mean, in Room, her life was difficult, but in a way it was wonderfully focused. She was mothering full-time. Whereas most of us parent in the real world where we're trying to be friends and workers and partners and all these other things. So I thought as soon as Ma's on the outside and she's having to be, the patient of a doctor, and the prodigal daughter returned to her own family, and Jack's mother, and as a celebrity, I think celebrity would be certainly an extra pressure. So all these roles she's trying to play, I think it really would pull her apart. But it has disappointed many readers that she doesn't stay so heroic all the way through. But I thought it made for a deeper story. And I certainly wanted Jack to have to get on with life without her for a while and really start to grow up. Because I suppose, again, I was trying to find that universal story within the strange story. And kids all have those moments of growing past their parents and realising that in some ways they can manage better without their parents, at least for a little while. So I wanted Jack, too, to discover that even at 5.
Why did you have her be an adopted?
Good question. I had Ma be an adopted child. the question was, why did I decide to have Ma be an adopted child? I was really aware that in the first half of the book, Ma and Jack are a very strange family. And I was trying to treat them quite respectfully, almost as members of a little two-person tribe. And I read up a lot on family models and what are the really crucial components of a family. Things like a sense of routine and family rhythms and family rituals and all these things that hold families together no matter what shape the family comes in. And so I didn't want it to be that Ma and Jack are this strange little anomalous family, and then as soon as she's on the outside, she's embraced back into her absolutely regular nuclear family. So I thought, first of all, her parents should have split up, because it does seem to me that very often when young girls are stolen away, the uncertainty of dealing with it very often seems to contribute to parental divorce. And then I thought also, if I make her adopted, that's another way in which her family isn't quite that nuclear family that we've been imagining for her. And in particular, I wanted a really ideal guy for Jack to get to know in the second half. And I thought, I won't make him the doctor who's got all that medical authority, and I won't make him Jack's grandfather, who you might expect to be the obvious one. I thought I'll have him be this complete newcomer, a step-grandfather, you know, who Ma didn't even know that this guy existed, and yet he turns out to be the one who's actually able to be relaxed and play with Jack. So I just wanted the embrace of family in the second half of the novel to be just subtly complicated by a few of these factors. Because again, it's like the way you think the outside world is going to be the answer to all their dreams, and then in many ways there are things about it that don't suit them as well as Room did. So similarly, I didn't want the move from the little two-person family to the bigger family to be absolutely effortless, you know. Yeah.
I'm coming with the microphone.
It's like a talk show with a roaming mic. It's wonderful.
I really enjoyed your book.
Thank you.
And I saw a lot of parallels to Alice in Wonderland throughout the book. And I was wondering if you could discuss that a bit.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, I have small kids, and yet I come from an academic background. My father is a professor. So I wanted the book to appeal equally to 11-year-olds and university professors. So I wanted people to be able to read it at an absolutely straightforward, page-turning level, and as a sort of allegorical level. I think Room can stand very easily for either everybody's childhood or the womb, or it can stand for the human condition, in that we're all locked in one little consciousness, in one life. We all have to make the best of some element of confinement. So I wanted to sprinkle some text into Room, connecting it, you know, with other aspects of literary tradition, and yet I didn't want these to be too heavy-handed. So I didn't want Ma to, you know, have memorized all of Paradise Lost and be quoting it to him. You know, I thought, you know, if I always think when I'm in an elevator and it seems to be moving quite slowly, I think, oh God, I'm going to be trapped. And instead of remembering Paradise Lost, I'm going to be going through Kylie Minogue lyrics, you know. So I wanted to give Ma a fairly random mixture of what would be in her memory and what she could pass on to Jack. So I have, for instance, the therapist quoting a few poems in the second half, but Ma does not have a head full of poetry. And again, when I was thinking about what books to give Ma and Jack, I didn't want them to be, you know, the 10 most meaningful classics of the English language, especially as I knew Old Nick would never darken the door of a bookshop, you know. I didn't invent a very elaborate backstory for him, but I knew he was not a bookstore-going kind of man. So they had to be, when I finally decided to give Ma and Jack 5 books each, I thought they had to be things you could buy in a drugstore, you know. So poor Ma just gets 5 random bestsellers. I think I've only read one of them, The Da Vinci Code. The rest I just plucked their names from the bestseller lists. And then for Jack, I couldn't bear to give him just 5 really trashy kids' books. So he's got nursery rhymes because they're, you know, cheap and easy to find, but they're actually, they've got many wonderful echoes of his situation, in that they're all about battling the random evil of giants and ogres. And then I thought I'll give him one irritating pop-up book, which has very few words in it. And then I thought he could credibly have The Runaway Bunny, because it sold a lot at Easter time, you know, in drugstores. So I thought maybe he could have that. And then I wanted to give him one great, great book which would be a natural source of reference for him and would have something to do with his storyline. And Alice in Wonderland, luckily, because it's out of copyright, you can get it in many places for, you know, $1. So I thought, okay, maybe he could have Alice in Wonderland. But Alice in Wonderland had always appealed to me as one of the first great kids' books, one of the first books in which a very natural child's voice tells the whole thing. I mean, it's in the third person, but there's lots of moments when Lewis Carroll just sort of transcribes her thoughts, and especially the kind of zigzag stream of consciousness, and the way she tries to sort of make sense of her situation, but she still has that child logic. So, people sometimes talk as if what I've done in Room is a whole new invention in terms of a child's voice, but there's a very long tradition of it, and I would say Alice in Wonderland is one of the first. And hers is also a book about two worlds, going down into an underworld which is a strange sort of version of her outside world, and crazier in some ways and less controllable, but also very exciting. All the changes in size, for instance. Again, the changes in size in Alice in Wonderland, they're a wonderful kind of commentary on child perspective, adult perspective. There's that moment when I think she, eats the cake and she gets huge, and suddenly a bird is pecking her in the eyes, saying, "Go away, don't eat my eggs." And she's realizing that she's being perceived by this bird as a snake and as a villain and a monster just because she's got bigger. And then there's so many moments when she's really short again and she can't get to what she wants. So I think Alice in Wonderland is such a wonderful reference for anyone writing a book about sort of a little world and a bigger world, that I couldn't resist putting it in. But I tried to keep the allusions fairly light otherwise, because I didn't want it to have that feel of, this book is just a device or a trick, I mean, some people pick it up and they go, oh yeah, Plato's theory of human life as a cave in which you're only seeing shadows on the wall. But many readers just pick it up and go, oh, little boy. And, I wanted to serve all those readers equally. I didn't want it to wear its philosophy on its sleeve, But I knew I was safe enough with a 5-year-old narrator. With a 5-year-old narrator, you're never going to go too far into the realm of the abstract, He's always going to bring it back to what happens when we flush, Roaming mic, please. I agree that this particular little corner is hogging the time.
You grew up in Ireland and you live in Ontario. Why did you set your story in the United States?
Well, I wanted it to be... Why did I set my story in the United States? I wanted it to be set in North America because the first few cases of this kind that I read about were all continental Europe, Austria and Belgium. And so I thought, I'll set my story in North America as one of many ways in which I was distancing my storyline from the ones that happened in Austria. And I thought, again... I won't make it an underground location like a basement or a dungeon. I'll make it above ground with natural light to make the horror less. So I thought I'll use a shed. So I thought I was being so completely different from all the storylines. I wrote the entire book and then sold it to my publishers, and then J.C. Dugard was discovered in America in a shed. So sometimes, you honestly can't help accidentally overlapping with life, even if the book came before life. But another reason I set it in North America is that I live in North America, and I thought at first, okay, might be Canada, might be America. But the villain, this is going to sound insulting, but Old Nick started to strike me as an American. So I mean, no, we do have psychopaths in Canada. We do. But they're a bit more, rural. There was something about Old Nick, the fact that he has this big suburban garden and he, goes to the hardware store, comes back, renovates his shed, and that nobody ever visits his house or butts in. And if they did, he would have a gun. So he just struck me somehow as an American. And also, the world that Ma and Jack were emerging into... celebrity is found everywhere now, but I think it was definitely in America that particular kind of highly investigative, intrusive journalism was invented. I'm thinking of early 20th century movie magazines. For the first time they began to really pry into the lives of film stars. So even though now, wherever in the world you are, there's a reporter, I think America was the inventor of that particular notion of, tell us all. So... it just struck me that America was where they should emerge into, especially as, in the world in general, that kind of Coca-Cola colonialization, it always implies that modern America is the best possible place you could emerge from your grubby little background into. And so I thought it was fun to have Ma and Jack turn up in America and, go to a very, very nice high-end psychiatric clinic and be welcomed by the world, welcomed, and have a talk show hostess there ready to talk to them, and yet that many aspects of their life would be intolerable. And it's funny, a lot of the satire in the second half of the novel, it's not at all that I came to this novel with an agenda, like I want to satirize modern life or I want to satirize modern America. It was more that I had created this 5-year-old Jack, and a bit of like creating a monster in that he turned out to have a lot to say. He turned out to be quite critical of many aspects of modern life in a way that I'm not particularly critical. I really was just trying to follow on from that child's perspective. And I mean, I see looking at my own kids that they would love me to, turn off the internet and sit down and play with them more often. So I thought Jack would naturally comment on the many ways in which it's sort of strange that how we use our freedom is we sit in rooms and look at screens, and we have a lot of virtual experiences rather than real sensory ones. So, all the time Jack is imprisoned with Ma, she's thinking, I want him to run and feel the grass on his bare feet. But then so many children out in the real world are in fact indoors in little rooms, looking at screens. So all that social satire just seemed to grow naturally out of creating this character, I mean, once you've invented a character, you're sort of, you never know what they're going to say,
Your stories reflect such a broad array of subject matter. I have a two-part question. How does your next story come to you? And how do you create? How do you write the story? What is are you regular? Do you write every day? What is you're from initiation of an idea to the birth of your final novel?
I think everybody gets ideas. The only difference is if you're a working writer, it's like being a very sensitive fisherman. You never let one get away. So instead of thoughts just drifting through my mind, I go, oh, that's an idea, and I write it down, either on a computer if I have one near me or a scrap of paper. But I never let one get away in that sense. And the other difference is that I've developed a certain confidence in my powers of imagination. So instead of thinking, oh, well, it would be interesting to have a novel from the point of view of a locked-up child, but how could I possibly? Instead, I think, that book should happen, so I'll do it, And your muscle of imagination, it does get stronger with using it just like any other muscles. So I've learned never to be scared off by the fact that a subject might seem at first like it's beyond me or not like something I've ever done before. Many of my novels don't grow out of my life at all. They grow out of imagination and research. So even if it's the subject that I've never touched on before, I just assume that I can go to a library and find out about it. My ideas come from all over the place. I've quite often based my work on historical incidents. So sometimes I'll just come across something. I was in, there's a lovely stately home in Hampstead Heath in London, and I was there once, and there was a painting on the wall, rather odd painting of a sort of, delicate, pretty girl, and then in the background another delicate, pretty girl, but clearly dark-skinned, and she was holding a tray of fruit, but they were both wearing these beautiful dresses, and I thought, that's an odd situation, she doesn't look like a servant. So I sort of looked into that one, and it turned out that the dark-skinned one was the cousin of the other one, and that she was being raised very much as two girls together, even at a time when England was still full of slaves. So, I mean, that's an example of where many people would have walked past that picture and thought, oh, that's a funny one, but I just hook them more, I scurry off and I look them up immediately. And often I don't have the time to write it immediately, but I keep files. I mean, I've got files on about the next 4 novels. Whenever I'm on an airplane, I think, oh no, I can't crash, I still have all those books to write. But you asked a bit about my writing process. I would say writers cover a real spectrum on this, from the kind of mystical, visionary kind through to the architect kind. And I'm the architect or craftsman kind. I do a huge amount of planning. And some people think that this spoils the fun or bursts the bubble of magic. But I actually think that the magic can happen because you've built a strong enough stage for it. So I tend to plan not only what my first scene is and my last scene, but where the story will move in between. And I write down what I think is going to happen in each scene. And then you can see very clearly things like, oh, not much happens in chapter 4. Maybe I don't need chapter 4. So I find that I can make the plot much more muscular and have much more sort of impetus and momentum if I look closely at what's going to happen in each scene. And then, of course, there's also room for it to change. When I wrote my novel Slammerkin about an 18th century prostitute who goes to work as a maid, she tries to sort of clean up her act. I knew that there would have to be a few other servants in that household for it to be realistic, so I just thought, okay, there'll be a general sort of man of all work. And then as I was writing the first draft, it's odd, a kind of chemistry began to build up between her and this man of all work, and I thought, oh, actually, they could have a bit of a romance. So I went back and reworked my plans based on that. So there's always room for it to improvise and vary as you go along, but I find that having a really strong structure worked out in advance, it means you don't lose your way. Many students can write a poem or a short story as one sort of complete burst, but a novel is long and you tend to get a bit lost or bogged down in the middle. So I think planning is the most helpful possible way to kind of structure all that creativity. So yeah, I not only plan what's going to happen, but I keep separate files on, every character. For Room, I would have had a file called things like, TV shows they happen to see, clothes they wear, food they like, food they don't like. And then I then draw from all these files when I'm writing the actual scenes. And as for my daily routine, it's simply called daycare. I get my 3-year-old daughter into daycare, and then my mind is absolutely focused. I have till 3 o'clock. I used to waste much more of my time, but motherhood put an end to that.
Will you please speak to the title? When did you decide on the title?
I think I got the title on day one. Telling the story of how I got the idea for Room, I'm afraid it makes it sound like the sort of easy mystical route, because it's not usually like this. Usually you sweat over books, and often they don't get a final title until, a last-minute argument with your editor on the brink of publication. I mean, I've had books which were named one thing for many years and then a last-minute change. My novel Slammerkin, for instance, would never have become a bestseller if I had stuck with my original title, which was The Complaint of the Crows. I mean, I wouldn't pick up a book called The Complaint of the Crows. I don't know what I was thinking. So my editor in Britain, she bought the novel, but she said, sorry, Emma, we'll have to change the title. She said, give me some word to do with clothing, and we went through a long list and we settled on the word Slammerkin. And I'm sure that and the cover showing a cleavage was why the novel sold so well. Because that's the problem with literature. You do have to get it to the reader. So Room was a total contrast in that I was literally driving along a highway a few days after I'd heard about the Fritzl case in Austria. And I had also recently been reading Cormac McCarthy's The Road, or rather weeping over it. And that book really was lingering in my head, and I was thinking that was such an archetypal father-son story, and what would an equivalent mother-child story be? And as I was driving along, I thought, that little boy emerging from the dungeon in Austria, the story of his life both before and after, that moment when he steps out into a world he never knew before, that could be a novel. And it's me who should write it. And I think I had the title Room on day one, partly because, like I was saying with the way he names objects in his room, I wanted him to absolutely take for granted the space he grew up in. And after all, he thinks it's an entire world. So I think I was also slightly thinking of, in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, which again features a kind of a crucial wardrobe. I think the Snow Queen, she says something about, you come from the land of spare which is her mishearing of them calling it the spare room. But somehow the idea of this highly important room cut off from the rest of the world, which has a wardrobe in it, I think there's probably an echo of Narnia there. And I just wanted Jack to absolutely take his world for granted, so simply calling it Room. And of course, what I loved about the word was that it has that other implication of infinite space, infinite possibility. Some very bright blogger told me the word for this, a word which contains its opposite, like cleave. You can cleave to something or cleave away from something. I've forgotten what that word is, but room is one of those words that contains its opposite. And And it also has a lovely echo of womb as well. And I think the idea of this small space in which the mother-child bond happens and then out of which you have to break is very sort of uterine. So Room just struck me as a perfect title, and I was terrified somebody else might have used it. So every few months during the writing process, I'd go on Amazon and just check that nobody else had called their novel Room recently. I know there's a rather cult bad film called The Room, but I thought, it's a film, this is a book, so they're not really going to be mistaken for each other. And luckily, none of my publishers ever tried to mess with the title. They never tried to change any of it, in fact. The book was very lightly edited. And it's funny, I was doing an event the other day in England, and somebody said, did your publishers try and push you to make it more voyeuristic or more sentimental in the hope that it would sell? And I said, no, publishers, they're not so evil and they're not so stupid. I mean, if what they're marketing is a work of literary fiction, they don't want to make it either voyeuristic or sentimental. So, no, they never pushed me in any of those directions. They just helped me fine-tune certain moments in it to make it more and more credible. But no, they never wanted to try and make it into anything it wasn't. I hope there haven't been any questions at the back. Yes, you see, I don't see you as well at the back. There we go, right at the back.
Hello.
Oh, okay, you're next. This lady here and then at the back.
Can you talk a little bit about your history books and what research tricks could you reveal to us?
You mean my historical novels? Yeah. I'm not sure I have any research tricks. It's simply that I do 10 times as much as I need. The problem with historical fiction is always if you leave in too much, then the book gets weighed down. I mean, we've all had that experience of picking up a historical novel and thinking, okay, this is the History Channel, I'm being educated. And you want your novel to wear its research lightly. So I just do quantities and quantities of research. People sometimes think there's a real mystery to this, like, you must have access to a secret archive with unpublished manuscripts. But, I mean, often I'm simply drawing on the specialist works of other scholars. I mean, if I'm writing a scene in which my main character is taking a stagecoach journey from London to Wales, I go to the library and I come back with stacks of books about things like roads in 18th century Britain, and I'll have a list of very specific questions like, how much did you pay per stage? Did you pay at the beginning of the day or the end of the day? And sometimes that research, although it might seem quite tedious, it can actually give you ideas for scenes. So in the case of my novel Slammerkin, when I found that you paid at the end of each day or sometimes at the end of the whole trip, I thought, there could be an interesting moment where my main character has taken the journey, but she doesn't actually have the money to pay. So she'll have to somehow rustle up money that evening to pay the driver in the morning. And then I thought, okay, she needs to trick one of the other passengers into apparently seducing her, and then she'll get lots of money from him. So in that case, that petty little bit of research actually gave me an idea for a whole scene, which then developed into a storyline, because, of course, she thinks that man is just some random passenger on the journey with her, but it turns out he's living in the same small town as her when she gets there. So the research is endlessly fruitful. And I know that some novelists who actually hire somebody to research something for them, they'll say, like, go tell me about boats in the 1920s. But I really don't want a précis. I don't want the Wikipedia entry on boats in the 1920s. I want the kind of tiny, vivid details that you only get by really steeping yourself in books and pictures of boats in the 1920s. So I also love open stack libraries where you can literally kneel down, in a worshipful position. And yes, you'll be plucking out one book that you want, but then the books right beside it could turn out to be really interesting too. So I just do a lot of research, and then I have to make myself throw much of it away. But there's just absolutely there's no substitute for endless research. And even a contemporary book like Room, I always over-research it. For instance, you see, there are no children exactly like Jack, in that most children who've been raised in any kind of imprisoned situation are deeply damaged and of bad health as well. Room is very much a kind of imaginary best case scenario in which Jack has everything he needs apart from society, apart from freedom. So, I've made sure he had things like the vitamin pills and lots of exercise and, the ideal stimulating mother. So it's not like there are lots of real Jacks out there that you can study. And so I looked to many parallel situations. For instance, in quite a few countries, they let children stay in prison with their mothers up to maybe 7. They actually think it's less cruel. So there are studies of things like children in prison, and in some of those situations they don't tell the child that it's a prison. They keep them in a special mother and child unit and they pretend it's just regular daycare. So, even that was a strange kind of parallel to the situation in Rome. At what point would you decide that you should tell the kid that it's a prison? I read up about things like children, feral children, as they're often called, who've been raised in some way sort of outside of human range, either locked up in a house or in a, hen shed or something. And in those cases, which are particularly tragic, it's the denying of them language that seems to me to do the worst. It really stunts them and it cuts them off from being fully human. And so even that research, even though it wasn't directly relevant to how Jack is raised, it made me realise that language, above all, was what Ma should be giving him. I mean, yes, he gets cuddles and hugs and games, but, she gives him nursery rhymes and stories and songs and rhyming games, and she defines words for him, and they play all sorts of word games because she's trying to give him language as if she was the whole world. She's trying to make it up to him. So, I researched all sorts of strange things, most of it on the internet. So I think my second day of research, I was on YouTube looking at police video of the Fritzls' underground quarters. And so some of that research was so immediate and visual and visceral, it was just horrifying. And often I was reading about crimes and therefore reading it in the form of newspaper reports that would come one day and then the next, and each day you'd get a few more details. And I got fascinated by the actual media response to these cases. So I wasn't just mining all these news reports for the actual facts of the situation. I began to get fascinated by the different styles in which they were described, and whether in sort of, we bring in our expert psychoanalytical professor to give his view, or, at the really sort of trashy level. So I got very interested in the different languages people use to describe this kind of case. And in particular, there were some message boards that fascinated me, in which people who, had only read a handful of facts about, say, Elizabeth Fritzl, were rushing online in the middle of the night, with bad spelling, with all these feelings that they had about her. Some of them saying that she was a saint and a sort of Virgin Mary for our time, and others saying she should have got those kids out earlier. So I was astonished at the passionate range of responses to these cases, and I began thinking that the book should actually include some of these, that it shouldn't just be Jack's story in isolation, but it should also be how our world would react to someone like him. So even though Room was researched almost entirely on the internet, it was still just as deep a research project as many of my historical ones. Sorry, there was a woman right at the back, and then I'll go to you. Thanks.
First, I just want to say our book group loved the virtual tour of Room online on your webpage. It was really fun to explore.
Yeah, on roomthebook.com you can kind of zoom around it.
When you're talking about the title, I know that it's been, or we read that it was optioned for a movie.
No, I haven't sold any film rights in it yet. There has been a lot of interest, but I haven't sold it yet. Oh, okay. And I certainly could sell it, but I really want it to be a good film. I don't want it to be a bad film, even if a bad film would, make me money. I would find it embarrassing to have a bad film out there. And Room could so easily be a bad film. I mean, I sometimes torture myself with thinking how it could be this sentimental TV movie about motherhood. I love you, Mom. I love you, son. And then it could become one of those, standard rape thrillers. So I consider it my personal mission to hold on to the rights until the right director is in place. So I really don't want to sort of hand over the rights. So I've written a screenplay, and I want to, they'll have to prize it from my cold dead hands. There was somebody down here?
Yes, I have two questions. My first question, back to the importance of language and how Ma understood that for Jack. But the one that really interested me was the parroting. When they would watch the TV, and then she would ask him to parrot back. Have you done research on that? Is that something that you do with your own children? I found that very fascinating, that he could recite, after one hearing, some things that he heard on the TV, especially at the high caliber of language used.
I haven't done that with my own kids as well. I know I use kids the way most parents use TV. If their kid is in a rich environment otherwise, if your kid is watching TV, you rush off and you ring your mother. So no, I don't sit down with them and talk about the TV shows like you're meant to. But my kids just soak up language from the world around them. I think Jack is in a very odd and impoverished situation. So I was trying to think of ways in which Ma would sort of squeeze the maximum educational and pleasure component out of everything they were doing. I thought, okay, he's got to exercise to stay healthy. So I made all the furniture quite light and movable so that she'd, flip the table onto the bed and run races and so on. But I thought, again, I mulled a lot over whether to let them have TV at all. It was odd because the writer is always, in some sense, the old Nick, the captor for their characters. I mean, we're always deciding what to put them through and what to allow them. But in the case of Room, because old Nick was a character, I was horribly aware that my decision-making was paralleling his. I was sitting there going, should they have TV? Should they have books, Should they have ice cream? And then I thought, no, it's going to be a small European-style fridge, and there'll be a small freezer section, and Ma will fill it with green beans. So no ice cream for Jack. So I was aware of the cold-blooded nature of that process. And yes, I wasn't sure whether to give them TV, and I thought, I don't want them to be watching TV all day. But that in itself made me think, maybe Ma is a tough enough character that she will use it in a sparing way, and she will make it be educational, and then she'll turn it off, even though most of us, God knows, would just let it stay on 24 hours a day. I mean, I know if I was in Room, I would let him watch TV all day, and I would be writing a novel on toilet paper, So, no, parroting was just, I thought, how is she going to make the TV watching less passive? And I thought she's always in the back of her mind thinking that she wants to get him ready for the outside world. She hopes that they will escape someday. So many of the things they do, like learning to, like sort of stretching their eyes far away and close, or learning to lie very still, all those will turn out to be useful for escaping or for the outside world. So I just thought the parroting was one thing that she would probably do to have him pick up a wider vocabulary, even though there are times when it's absurd. She realizes, she's trying to explain some term to him like labor law, and really what is the point? They don't live in a society yet. No, I just tried to have Ma use everything for maximum entertainment. And even some of the things that she has to do with him, she'll turn them into a game, like the screaming for help, for instance. I thought probably, any boy would like the chance to stand on a table and scream as loud as possible once a day. So I just tried to give her quite a complicated agenda of both trying to get rescued and fitting him for the outside world, but to sort of hide that agenda so that she wouldn't seem like this strange prison matron, I wanted to keep her fun. But of course, a lot of the time she's having to say things like, wash your hands, wash your hands. So she's not always fun. But I really tried to get the balance of mood right throughout, so that, I would literally go through the draft of the book and I'd say, Ma has been cranky for a page and a half now, so let's go back and put a fun game into the middle of that page. Or, equally, she said 3 sweet things to him in a row, well, let's remove the second one. So I never wanted their relationship to sort of settle into one thing. I wanted it to be very dynamic in that way, because I find what's fascinating about the parent-child relationship is that it's never static, I mean, a couple can fall into fairly reliable patterns, but a parent and child, it's changing every day because the child is changing. So I found, even just when my son was a little baby, sometimes I'd be up late at night, he wouldn't go to sleep, and I'd be thinking, he's my master and I'm his slave, this tiny creature is running my life, And then the next minute, if I sort of, left him in his car seat for a minute while I was going to get a handbag, I'd think, oh my God, I've strapped him in, he's a prisoner. So I know it might seem extreme, but I think the parent-child relationship really covers that whole range, from very mutual, equal, playful moments right through to the extremes of sort of mutual tyranny. So that's why I did a lot of sort of tinkering with the tone of their conversations, because I didn't want it to settle into one thing for too long.
We have time for one more question.
One more question.
I was going to ask another question. Do I still get one more?
If we've only one more question, I think the mic has to go 2 rows forward. There you go, ma'am.
How difficult was it to come up with the escape and rescue?
I always knew that I wanted the escape to be a symbolic death. in the real cases in which people have been held long term, very often they're rescued in some haphazard way. You know, somebody happens to hear about them, or you know, something accidental happens, like an illness. But you want a book to be more satisfying than life. So I wanted them to escape through their own merits. And yet it couldn't be something that Ma could easily have tried any day. It had to be something, to be satisfying, it had to be something that she could only do with Jack when he got to a point of being just about mature enough to be able to play this very dangerous game. So between that, you know, I knew it had to be something that relied on Jack. He had to be the hero of this story. And I wanted it to have this slightly magical fairy tale element of it. And I wanted it to be a kind of symbolic death. So that fairly quickly led me to the basic notion. But my brother-in-law really helped me to fine-tune it, because he's a very, you know, guy. So I had consulted him already on the construction of Room, because really, you know, I would have no idea how you make something that stands up. So he was the one who gave me the idea that Old Nick will actually have put a layer of chain link fence into all the surfaces, for instance. And then as I asked my brother-in-law, you know, some technical questions like that, he started coming up with some little psychological inputs into Old Nick. He'd ring me up and say, Emma, you're psycho. Your psycho's got to make her use cloth diapers, because if he's a bachelor, he can't be putting bags of disposables out. His neighbours will wonder. So, you know, my brother-in-law was going beyond his remit in offering little suggestions, you know, tapping his inner psychopath. And with the escape scene, I had thought it would be something like that Old Nick carries Jack out and then Jack runs away, but my brother-in-law said he'd have a pickup truck. And, you know, the back of the pickup truck you could technically jump down from, so he was very helpful in that. But then the way I'd written it first, it happens relatively easily. But then I asked my son, and where we were staying happened to have a fairly you know, dusty old Persian rug, and there was my son, 5 years old, you know, game for anything. So I said to him, I'm writing a story about a bad guy who, you know, has locked a boy up and the boy needs to escape. Could I roll you up in this rug? And he said, sure, you know. So I rolled him up and he began to cough and squeal and ask to be let out. But I'm afraid at that point the writer in me had taken over from the mother, so I did not unroll him right away. I reassured him, I calmed him down, I patted him through the rug, and I even put my fingers in the end, you know, to give him a little bit of finger contact. But basically I asked him to work harder at it, and I kept saying, I know you can do this, you know. And he was kind of panicking in there a little bit, but I was being the ruthless writer. And eventually he did manage to get out, you know. So I, you know, gave him some fine French pastries, and he's now very proud that I used him in this way, you know. So I'm not sure he was entirely consenting, but he's proud now. So. Well, this has been enormously enjoyable for me. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you all for joining us this evening. Explore Booksellers is selling books in the lobby, and Emma will be available to sign them.